I want to welcome everybody here. This is a rather historic one for us since this is our first meeting with our full complement of new commissioners. Certainly want to welcome them all here and express the appreciation that we have for them to have come forward to serve the community this way. And certainly we appreciate seeing the people who are in attendance today. With that, we're probably going to, as we go through our agenda, we are probably going to be doing a little bit of extra explanation. So I think we'll just work through this as calmly and patiently as possible, and I think we'll be doing just fine. So, yeah, I'll be explaining a little bit more because we have new people in the audience. So, with that, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Nolte?
Here.
Commissioner Withington?
Here.
Commissioner Lawson?
Here.
Commissioner Wagner?
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
That brings us to approval of this afternoon's agenda. Is there a motion related to approval of the agenda today?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
Motion has been made for the approval of the agenda as written. Is there discussion, any changes or alterations to our relatively brief agenda today? Any discussion? Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Withington? Yes. Commissioner Lawson? Yes. Commissioner Wagner?
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Very well. That brings us to public comments. Are there any members of the public who would wish to come forward and make a comment? As you're making your way up, a couple of points. Please queue up behind the person who is speaking. When you come up to the podium, please make sure that the green light is on the microphone. Address your comments to the commission. Identify yourself, and then you may certainly proceed from there. Thank you. First person.
Hi there, Kathy Reinhardt. I wish to welcome everybody. Congratulations on your win, and good luck with your new form of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would wish to address the commission on any subject? Seeing none. That brings us to our regular agenda. Administrator, 2023-01.
Resolution 2023-01 is a consideration of approving an agreement and a capital project encumbrance request for the replacement of bridge number 183007 on Lancaster Road with Decker Construction, and Highway Administrator Terry Griffin is here to provide information to the Commission.
Please proceed.
Thank you. This is a bridge that was rated poor in the most recent MoDOT inspection and has a posted weight limit of 18 tons, which means that farm trucks...
Could you speak a little bit more in your microphone, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
This is the bridge has a weight limit of 18 tons, which means that no heavy farm equipment, trash trucks, and even school buses should not be crossing the bridge. The new bridge will be designed and built to MoDOT current standards and will not have a posted weight restriction. We're requesting approval of $400,000 from the 2021B Bond Construction Fund for on-call contractor Decker Construction to build the new bridge, and I would be glad to answer any questions the commissioners may have.
Do any commissioners have questions or comments about this particular item? And I do want, before we proceed, I want to remind commissioners that this is a work session, so on our regular agenda, the decision item that we will be looking to make on this and the next item are whether or not they go on regular or on consent agenda for the next meeting. The general breaking point is things go on regular agenda if they involve the expenditure of funds or if they are controversial. Otherwise, they can be put on the consent agenda, and that will be the decision point today for these next two items. So with that, please proceed.
We anticipate that construction would start by the end of the month, and Decker anticipates that construction, depending on weather, of course, could be completed in 2 to 3 months.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to comment on 2023-01? Seeing none. The way it, by the way, just again, for a point of information, if these items go on to consent, any commissioner who would like to have that on regular, we have traditionally extended that courtesy and put it on regular for discussion. If it is on consent, they will be bundled together and voted on as a group up until the time we take up the, well, actually, when we take up the consent agenda, up until we actually vote on it, I suppose. But we have a lot of latitude any time between now and then for any commissioner to request an item be removed from consent and put on regular item for a more full discussion if they so choose. With that, since there are no other comments, my recommendation, since this involves the expenditure of funds, would be to put it on a regular agenda for next week. Is that the consensus of the commission?
It is, for me.
Very well. In that case, 2023-01 will be on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2023-02, Administrator.
Resolution 2023-02 is consideration of approving ARPA funding authorization and capital project encumbrance for a stormwater infrastructure project for a branch of Fishing River at Riverbend Estates. And again, Highway Administrator Terry Griffin is here to provide information to the commission.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Riverbend Estates was built in the late 1970s, and upstream development since that time has caused heavier stormwater flows throughout the subdivision beyond what was anticipated at the time of construction. We're requesting approval of $170,426 from the ARPA Stormwater Infrastructure Fund for on-call engineering firm Alfred Benish and Company to assess the condition and adequacy of the existing stormwater structures within that subdivision. Benish will recommend repairs or new structures as needed to provide resilient stormwater control and eliminate flooding throughout the neighborhood. I'd be glad to answer any questions the commissioners may have.
Thank you. I am assuming, and I think I know the answer, but I'll ask anyway, these expenditures are, of course, qualified under the ARPA guidelines.
Yes, they are. And in fact, this project was authorized, not the funding, but the authorization was authorized in September.
Very good. Any questions or comments on this issue? Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. This may be more for the county administrator. I do.
Oh, go ahead and hit your green button.
I'm sorry. It's a learning process. So this was already authorized in September. What is our net ARPA funds that remain?
Most of the ARPA funds have been allocated in a presentation to staff to the commissioners. And so what we're anticipating is some of our projects will come in under budget and so when those funds are known, then we'll sort of cobble together whatever the outstanding amount is and come back to the commission with what that amount is and some ideas for particular projects.
Okay. I seem to recall that, and maybe my memory is faulty, that we had approximately $900,000 left of those funds that were not allocated. And I guess my question is that, does this project deal with that net, or is it still the same amount?
That's the same amount. This was already allocated and accounted for in the summary of our ARPA funding. And so that $900,000 is still sitting there unallocated, and this does not impede those dollars.
I see. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, is there anyone else who would care to comment on 2023-02? Seeing none, once again, seeing as this is an expenditure of funds, my recommendation would be to go on to the regular agenda. Is that the consent of the commission? Very well. 2023-02 will be on next week's regular agenda. Is there a motion for the disposition of the issues that we have heard so far today?
Commissioner, I'll move that we put items 2023-01 and 2023-02 on next week 6 p.m.'s regular agenda.
Discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
Aye, close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Withington? Yes. Commissioner Lawson? Yes. Commissioner Wagner?
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you. That brings us to our discussion items. We have one item under discussion, that is the 2023 proposed budget, and that would be an issue handled by our administrator, so please proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As you know, one of your major tasks and functions ahead of you is for the consideration and adoption of a budget for 2023. So what I'd like to do today is do a brief overview of the budget, and then certainly answer any questions and have discussion among the commissioners. We certainly appreciate your engagement during the budget process. And I'm going to ask Mike to do the next slide. Thank you. Kind of talking a little bit about the budget process. And so back in July, the three commissioners met to give some discussion and guidance to staff about what to consider for inclusion in the 2023 budget. And then internally, we began the planning process with our department heads and our office holders beginning in May, and that really took all the way up through October. Back in October, we did bring before the commission proposed fee changes, which was adopted by the commission and goes into effect January of 2023. On November the 16th, the proposed budget was introduced to the commission. It was also placed out on the website for the public. And also, since that time through November, December, 3 workshops were held in front of the commission, talking a little bit more in depth about the proposed budget. And so I certainly want to thank the new commissioners, because we know you were involved. Many of you were here at the meetings. You've received all the documentation. All of those workshop presentations were also placed out on the website for the public's engagement. Today, this afternoon, is simply just a recap to hit a very high level and allow the opportunity for you now as an elected body to have that discussion about the proposed budget and where we go from here. We are under state law required to have a budget adopted by the end of January, so there is an end to this. And so we've scheduled for the adoption to occur the last meeting of January, which would be January 25th. We do need to advertise for that because there is a public hearing that is part of that process. And so backing into that, we have picked your last meeting of January to have consideration for the adoption of the budget. So with that, just to recap the key considerations that we did and included in this budget, certainly the economic environment. And so I'm not going to go into all the detail about that. That's been discussed in the presentations, but we certainly are uncertain what the economy is going to do, what the recession is going to do, whether there is a recession, to what degree the recession is. And as you all know, sales tax is the primary revenue source for the county. So we are very mindful of what the economic environment is. We also included in our proposed budget the priorities that the commission gave us back in July, which is to update the county's comprehensive plan, increase funding for roads and bridges, implement market adjustments in COLA, and increase funding for facility maintenance. This is simply just a chart, again, for those that are tuning in, on the structure of the county government. We have 565 full-time positions and 39 part-time positions that are funded for the full year in 2023. This chart should look familiar to you. The 2023 proposed budget has an authorization request of $155.1 million. Now, it does get a little skewed. We're very grateful for our one-time money of ARPA funding and emergency rental program and our bond proceeds, but we kind of need to take those out so we can really do a comparison. So while we're asking for an authorization of $155.1 million, when we set aside our one-time funds, we're looking at a proposed budget of $129.9 million. And comparing that to our 2022 adopted budget, that's an increase of 9.7% in the budget. We look at the revenue sources for our countywide budget. You can see that 31% comes from sales tax, 37% is coming from reserves, and 4% come from property tax. Then we also have fee and licenses at 12%, and then some other small revenue around the pie chart. But since sales tax is our major source of revenue on a countywide basis, we want to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive on sales tax. So the bar chart to the left shows you how the different types of sales tax is forecasted. So we have a general sales tax that we believe and are budgeting $33 million of revenue in 2023. We have a law enforcement sales tax that goes specifically for law enforcement, and we're budgeting approximately $5.4 million. And then we also have a use tax or internet sales tax, and that is divided among 3 different capital funds, and we're estimating that to be approximately $9 million this year. So the bar chart in the center tries to explain the allocation of the $33 million general sales tax. And so in the budget proposal, we have direct allocation of that $33 million, where 52% of it would be in the general fund, 27% of it goes directly to law enforcement, 2% of it goes to the emergency communication, which is our 911 fund. We do get funding from 911 on landlines, but as you all know, most people are giving up landlines, and so that revenue continues to decline, and so we must subsidize that from our sales tax. Then we have Parks, who is getting a direct allocation of 1.4%, and Road and Bridge is getting a direct allocation of 7.2%. But then the last bar chart, trying to show you stair step of what's happening with the sales tax. So of the general fund sales tax, that 52% that we said was going directly to the general fund, we are also proposing in this budget that portions of that are transferred out to other funds. And so 48% of the amount that would be in the general fund is being transferred to the law enforcement fund. And then we have other allocations to the 911 fund, the prosecuting attorneys fund and retirement fund, the reassessment fund, the tax collection software, and the collector's software. And so what remains in the general fund of sales tax is approximately $7.9 million to operate the general fund. All the other portion of that 52% goes to those other funds that are allocated in this particular chart. And I know it gets a little confusing, so we try to show it in a different way. So the pie chart on your left is the allocation of the total $47.49 million in sales tax. So of the total sales tax, whether it is the law enforcement or the capital or the general, this pie chart shows you how that is allocated. And so 46% of the total sales tax received by the county is going to law enforcement, with 17% of it going to the general fund. We have some going to Road and Bridge, 5%, and then our capital, 3 different capital categories, and our emergency communication. So that shows you the distribution of the sales tax, which is the major revenue source for the county. The pie chart on the right will show you the allocation of property tax. So we have 2 property tax mill levies that are collected. One is for the general fund and one is for Road and Bridge, specifically dedicated to Road and Bridge. And so you can see that the revenue projected in property tax is $5.3 million, with 1.4 of that going to the general fund and 3.9 of it being dedicated pursuant to the mill levy for the Road and Bridge fund. So when we talk about expenditures, as I said on that first chart, we're asking for authorization of $155.1 million total budget authorization. We also on that chart showed you that we have ARPA money and bond money, which is one-time funds, and so we sort of take that away. And so now we have a budget of $129.9 million. But included in the $129.9 million are transfers. And so this becomes a sort of an accounting issue. But when we transfer money out of the general fund to law enforcement, it shows up as an expense in the general fund. And then when it's in law enforcement, it comes in as a revenue, but then it's also turned around and expensed. So in essence, we're spending the money twice. We have to do that from accounting purposes, but you can't spend money twice. And what we're trying to get down to is the operating budget. So when we remove transfers from that number, then we get down to $119.2 million. But also included in our expenditures is a line item called either contingency or rainy day money, and those are our reserves. And we have them as an expense so that there is authorization should they be needed. But we really don't want to spend those, and it is trying to get to operating. So that's not part of the operating budget. So when all is said and done through this whole analysis, the county's operating budget for 2023 that's being proposed is $113.2 million. So how are we spending that? This pie chart shows you by services how the funds are spent. So public safety is 37% of the operating budget. The general fund is 26%, road and bridge is 14%, and parks are 9%, and then some of our other smaller funds are shown on this particular pie chart. And so what are the expenditures? So some of the key highlights that are in the budget is certainly investing in our people. So we are fully funding the phase 2 of the sheriff's pay plan that was requested of the budget team. We're also fully funding the prosecutor's pay plan that he requested and is restructuring. We also have included merit adjustment, merit pool, and cost of living all wrapped into one for all our departments, equal to an 8%. And we're also funding the training, technical training for employees across the organization, and also supervisory training. We're also investing in public safety. So there are new positions that are being proposed. The commission may recall that late in the year, you did fund for 2 additional sheriffs for the impaired driving enforcement unit. There's grants associated with that. This budget does fully fund those positions pursuant to the grant information. We're also adding a victim advocate position in the prosecutor's office. We're upgrading a part-time criminal investigator to full-time in the prosecutor's office. We're also recommending 2 additional deputies in the juvenile offices and increasing the part-time in deputy juvenile hours. We're funding the sheriff's vehicle replacement program and his radio replacement program. We are allocated some funding to physically relocate the dispatch center into the consolidated dispatch facility in Gladstone when that construction project is done. We're replacing vehicles for the prosecutor's office. We're doing technology upgrades in the courtroom, and we're also doing safety improvements in the detention facility and in the Rudy Justice Center. This budget also has investments in our infrastructure. There's funding to do the comprehensive plan. There is funding to do the design of the Stockdale Bridge replacement. We also have our annual road and bridge preventive program. We have replacements, maintenance for box culverts. We're doing some fuel system upgrades for the Parks Department. We're continuing improvements out at Crows Creek at Smithville Lake. We're doing some facility improvements by replacing a roof at the sign shop at the Highway Department. Also replacing doors that are inoperable here in this particular building. We're doing some work at the golf course for some deferred maintenance, and we're also funding equipment replacement for both highway facilities and the Parks Department. And we're also recommending the construction of a material storage facility for our golf course. Included in the 2023 proposed budget for the CIP is approximately $21.7 million. And so the pie chart on the left will show you by program, where facilities is indicated to have 39% of the CIP. Roads has 17%, parks has 3%, and you can go on around the pie chart. I do want to kind of give a clarification on the facilities being so high at 39%. And part of the reasoning is included in that is the Law Enforcement Resource Center that is using ARPA money that is $6.9 million. So a significant portion of that facility percentage is attributed to one particular project. Now, the pie chart on your right will show you the funding sources for the CIP. So you can see again that our internet sales tax, the use tax that goes into the 3 capital accounts, capital general, capital road and bridge, and capital parks, actually equates for 58% of the funding for our capital program. Then we have some funding coming from various departments, and then we also have the ARPA funding, especially for the one large project that I just mentioned. So for the operating budget for all funds, you can see here the $113 million and how it is broken out for all the departments. So law enforcement is 22%, general fund is 27%, highway is 9%, and so on all the way. Park is 6%. So you can kind of see the allocation of the operating budgets that's being proposed. And so when you look at those other departments, but how do you break it out by category? So how are we spending the tax dollars money? So of the operating budget of $113 million, 51% of it is going towards personnel across the organization. Contractual is 32%, commodities is 8%, and capital is 9%. So just kind of recapping back to the commission's priorities that we received, updating the comprehensive plan. So there is funding in the proposed budget of $250,000 to do the comprehensive plan. There is a request to increase road and bridge. We certainly increased their budget, and also the maintenance. I think as I mentioned the last time we did a work session, we forecast, depending on pricing of asphalt, our goal with the funding that we're proposing, we would maintain 14% of our roads in the unincorporated area. In 2022, we only did 5%. So again, trying to accomplish the commission's objective of increasing the amount of maintenance to do. You ask us to implement marketing COLA adjustments and taking care of our employees. And so as I mentioned, we funded the phase 2 of the sheriff's plan that he submitted. We also funded the prosecutor's requests for restructuring, and also then all departments doing an 8% adjustment. And also ask us to increase facilities. So when we consider facilities, we consider that also our parks and also our buildings. And both of those have an increase compared to the 22 budget. And with that, the other thing I'd like to say is that we have really strived to keep the public informed of the budget process. All our presentations have been live streamed. All our presentations have been out on the website. We've also tried to encourage individuals to follow us on Facebook, and we've tried to put some information out on Facebook about some of the things that were being proposed in the budget. Again, encouraging our residents to stay engaged during the budget process. And that is the proposed budget, and we turn it over to you.
Thank you. Something I wanted to maybe get a little bit more information on, it's when we're talking about building a bridge or putting up a building, we can see that when we talk about personnel, we see the people. One of the things that I think is important, but maybe not quite as tangible, is the issue of our reserves. So could you just give us a little bit more information on kind of where we stand? Because in the time I've been here, unfortunately, we have been in a better position with reserves. They got spent down. And could you give us an idea of the importance of making sure that we have those reserves and kind of a snapshot of where we are at the moment and where we really should be?
Sure, thank you. You're correct. Historical look at the county's finances, the reserves of the county have been much higher than what they are now. And for various reasons over prior years, those funds were utilized for various opportunities. I will say that the last year, and we're hoping that when we conclude with 2022, we're still finalizing numbers, that we've been able to add to reserves to start building those back up. You know, the state law does require that the county keep 3% as a fund balance as a reserve. That is the requirement. I will say as your administrator that is not sufficient reserves, especially from an organization that relies heavily on sales tax. And so, you know, we have not seen the Christmas sales yet. Everything I've read, Christmas sales were good. You know, we get our sales tax 2 months behind from when they actually occurred. So we won't really see December sales until we get our money from the state in February. But because of that and because of the recession, so in 22, I will say our sales tax exceeded what we collected in 21. So we had a good year with sales tax. But when we look at the last quarter of sales tax on a cash basis compared to the prior quarter, the quarter from the prior year, the same, we were starting to see sales tax decline a little bit. So I think there is some conservative spending going on. And some of the things I read about Christmas sales, many people, that was put on credit cards. And so what that means is going forward, they will have less discretionary income through 2023. So we're not sure what our sales tax is going to be. So we have taken a conservative approach on sales tax, and we did factor in growth for sales tax for 23 compared to 22, but a conservative growth. Again, we're subject to what happens with the consumer and consumer confidence. And so if sales tax goes down and we're not bringing in on an annual basis what we need to do, then the only way we can fund our expenditures is to dip into our reserves. and cut expenditures going forward until there's a turnaround. So my objective with this commission is to come back to you and talk about what is a fund balance policy. What is your target? What is your minimum? And what is your target that you want to go to? We're not going to be able to build it up overnight because then we couldn't operate. But we do need to make a strategic effort to start increasing our fund balance.
I think that's a good point. Two things that occur to me. One is there is some consensus on where we are nationally and locally as an economy goes, but I think one of the things that we see an awful lot of consistent talk about is that we will be looking at a recession next year, which will certainly have some impact. The second thing that you said that certainly I think bears repeating is the statutory minimum is just that. We shouldn't regard that as necessarily adequate. It is the bare bones just to keep going. So we certainly need to not use that as our watermark for where we need to be. That is just kind of being on life support, so to speak.
You know, one of the examples I typically give will be consumer confidence may be great, people want to spend, but, you know, we're in Missouri. A tornado goes through and hits key locations that are retail areas. Residents are going to find another place to shop, and it may not be in Clay County. So even though the economy may be good, there are other things that can impact our revenue stream besides just consumer spending.
Life tends to happen. With that, are there any questions or comments for the administrator on this issue? Just go ahead and raise, because I'm trying, just raise your hand and I'll try to make sure I get everybody taken care of. Commissioner Johnson, please proceed.
Yes, I have several questions, thank you. By the way, thank you for all the work that you and your staff have put into this. It's, from what I understand, light years ahead of how we've done budget processes in the past. So thank you for that. But I have a few questions. Some of them I've asked you already in confidence, but, or not in confidence, but not in public. And I know the answer, but I wanted them repeated in public. The first is, we talk about a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, for all employees at 8%. The first question is, how do we come up with 8%?
Sure. That's a fair question. And so in essence, what I based it on at the time that we put the budget together is what was happening with CPI, which, as you know, has been up over 8% this past year. So we did propose 7 or 8%. The cost of living that employees were given in 2022 was 2%, so it was below the CPI. And in the prior year, in 2021, employees across the organization did not get COLAs unless they had funding. So the county has not necessarily made adjustments to employee salaries every year.
So there's never been any consistency then with COLAs or
No.
across, and there's never been any consistent calculation, whether it's CPI or anything else?
No, it's my understanding, actually, in talking to staff and the auditor's office, that the county didn't use CPI as a foundation in the past on what they gave for a COLA. They just came up with a number.
CPI, for clarification, being the Consumer Price
Consumer
Index,
Index,
so everyone
yes.
understands that, who may be watching at home. And just for, by the way, I am fully supportive of this 8%. I think our employees deserve that and are underpaid, to be precise. But for clarification, this 8%, it actually costs more than 8% for the taxpayers. So it's 8% in salary, but then we also will pay additional, slightly over 8% to cover.
Correct. As we know, there are benefits that are tied to someone's salary. So the county, as any employer does, pays FICA. So as a salary goes up, you know, that percentage that the county pays into FICA goes up, and also on into retirement. Correct.
And then, I just want to make sure that our employees understood that as well, and the taxpayers know that we understand that. It's not just a straight 8%, it's a little bit more than that. Again, I support that. And the next question is, who is and who is not eligible for this 8%? From what I understand, it's not everybody, but almost everybody.
It is correct. It is almost everybody. So with regard the 8%, it is the departments, those departments that fall under the commissioners. along with some of the office holders. So the 8% is for those other than the sheriff, because we're funding his second pay plan, and also the prosecutor, because we're funding his restructure. So other than those two areas, it's 8%. Other than, I am not an automatic 8%. And I believe, and I'll have to double check, but I think there are also some other positions that are under the commissioner's preview that would not necessarily be automatic, but you have the ability with those funds to do what you, if you want to make an adjustment.
Yeah, and you make a good point, just for clarification. The county administrator does not get an automatic 8%.
Correct.
Doesn't mean she doesn't get a raise, but that's calculated differently, and it's decided by the commission. The commission does not get 8%. We don't get anything. We do this for fun. And also, contract employees don't necessarily get 8% either. And I'm speaking
That's-
specifically of,
Right. That's correct. Although and I'm still doing research on that, because you did ask me
Yeah.
about that, and I've gotten different answers. And so I need to pursue that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I would say that there are office holders that are not in the, well, they are in the charter, and it gives the commission flexibility to adjust office holders, some of the office holders, and then also, I believe, the contract employees also.
okay.
And those are the ones I referred to as, those are your discretion. So we have funding set aside, and we would then defer to the commission on what you want to do.
perfect. And then on page 4 of your slides, it shows an org chart. Is that the existing org chart? Is that a new org chart, or is that?
That is the work chart as of January 2023.
Okay.
So it reflects the changes of the last office holders that are now non-elected
Okay.
and
And then,
restructured.
if we could put page 6 back up on the board for everyone to see, I have a question about this particular slide. It's the pie chart that has the reserves at 37% for revenue sources.
Yes.
So I'm hoping you can clarify this, because that's a scary number. We are using 37%, or I'm sorry, 37% of our revenue source comes from our reserves.
For the 155 million for the total authorization. So remember, some of those reserves are bond money, ARPA money, those one-time monies. And so that's why that's
so
such a large
So
percentage.
the ARPA money is included in that,
Yeah,
okay.
right.
So it's
Because
falling there.
this pie chart of revenue sources is for the full authorization of 155 million. So yes, if you look, that's part of our reserves.
And so when we're talking about our revenue versus expenses, we're not in a position where, or are we in a position where we have to constantly be dipping into our savings account to pay our bills?
So I would say it is interesting to me how the county has we historically do budgeting. The state law calls it carryover. And the state law says that whatever your carryover is, you must include that in your revenues in each budget year. So in essence, to me, that's fund balance. And yes, historically, it has worked out that we have tapped into the carryover to balance our operating budgets going forward. Now, that's one of the things I would like to get away from in the future and have a more balanced budget, that our operating revenues are in alignment with our operating expenditures. But
good.
we're not there yet.
But that is carryover, though.
Correct.
So it's not like rainy day funds that we're dipping into for.
Well, it's all mixed in together.
Okay, and then, actually, I have a lot of comments and questions about public safety, but I'm going to give someone else some time to talk, because I don't take up the whole night. But can I reserve time to come back and later and talk about?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that might, let's go ahead and kind of go through that. I'll come back around for another round of commissioners with follow-up, because if, for instance, one of the other commissioners asks a question, that may well spark another inquiry on your part. So I'm going to just kind of go round robin and then do it at least one more time and see what we come up with. Any questions or comments?
Commissioner, I have no comments at the time, except I'm glad we're having an in-depth conversation about this. So I'm going to keep it going.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yeah, I know I'll let the new commissioners ask any questions. Obviously, we've been doing this for the past few months, and this is their first meeting, so jump in.
Very good. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I will be using Commissioner Thompson and Commissioner Carpenter's time. Get used to it. I'm kind of in a similar boat as Commissioner Johnson, so I'll kind of hit some high points. Although maybe I may ask as the first question, since there's a lot of particular things, and I know no one wants to order pizza and bring it over here for tonight's dinner. I might ask, and maybe this is directed to the county councilor, as to perhaps the best way for some of these small, well, I shouldn't say smaller questions, but for questions that may not come up today, or I may just exhaust myself with the number of questions I have, but I want to be good with the administrator's time, but I also want to be sure that whatever questions that I do have or others may have may be available to others or can be answered at later commission meetings. I may just ask for a suggestion as to how that might be done. Not necessarily, no, oh no, because I'm sure the last thing, you lose popularity when you start asking for more meetings, so I'm not going there, but
We've had budget meetings that are more informal than the entire commission to really have more of a discussion focus about the budget.
well, some of these things I think may be very easy answers, but if you may have 50 questions and 40 of them are pretty easy to answer, but you don't want to take all the time of a meeting to do it. So, whether it is sending a list of those questions, or perhaps, Madam Administrator, you have an idea of how you'd like to get some of those questions, but.
Well, and I would agree with the county councilor. I mean, that was, and unfortunately you all were not seated at the time, but that's in essence what the work sessions were about, was the time to, to get into those type of questions. However, you weren't sitting at the dais at the time. So my suggestion would be, if you have those kind of questions, if you send them to us, we will answer them and then send back the response, almost like a Q&A, to all the commissioners.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So I'll save a bunch for that, but a few that I think are kind of important to me. I'll start with where Commissioner Johnson talked about with the with this carryover concept, which I will never suggest, as great as the state of Missouri is, not all things that they make counties do make a whole lot of sense to me, and this is one of them. As I do note, even with I think the prior slide or the one after this one, which really breaks down once you get rid of ARPA, the transfers, and less the reserves, you're at 113 million, which to me suggests here's the real money that we have. Everything beyond that is either someone else's money or it's our piggy bank. And I guess it's to throw out the idea that it seems to me that although it may not be accomplished in this budget, that is exactly where we've got to go as far as how we look at these funds. In my former life, we had a policy, and that policy was 2 months worth of operating funds in reserve, and you did not touch that. And if that carryover, I guess, to keep it to the state's language, is zero as far as what we actually spend, but the money is there to show that we have some surplus or something crazy like that, I guess that's the way I would suggest. But I do have great concern, because it essentially says we're going to keep spending money we don't have. and it makes zero sense to me to do that. That is not fiscally responsible.
You're absolutely correct, because now, usually budgets at the end, revenues come in higher than we budget and expenditures come in lower. And certainly we've seen that because we've had so many vacancies. However, there could be, and we have to plan for that year, where revenues came in right on budget or less than budget, and expenditures came in at budget.
Right.
And so now you have used those funds, and you don't have to use, they're not available to use again.
Right.
And so I would agree with you, that is a concern of mine also, and that's why I think we have to sit back and figure out the strategy on how do we get there so that our operating revenues equal our operating expenditures.
Right. So I guess that gets me to the question that I guess this is, what should we be expecting? The budget that has been laid out here is not a complete, or doesn't from the reserve standpoint, doesn't rely on everything that's been spent in the current calendar year. We see it, and we've still got a couple months to go, if I have my sequence and dating correctly. So at some point, we're going to close out 2022. Is that reserve number or that carryover number going to be where we hope it will be? Or
Well, I will say I did get some, what I would consider probably preliminary numbers from the auditor on Friday, and there will need to be some adjustments. Some of our funds, we're expecting to not have the same ending fund balance or carryover that we thought when we put this budget together, and we have other funds that are going to have more. And so we will be making some reallocations to make that work.
which I think illustrates why going down this road and budgeting in this manner doesn't necessarily work very well. So, got it. I'm going to flip gears for a second and go on the revenue side. And I have this giant tome that will one day hold up the biggest table in the world, probably. And I'm just trying to understand some of the estimates that were made on revenue. And I think your point that you mentioned earlier is very well taken about being conservative with these estimates. But as I'm looking at, and I apologize, this is probably what I have to send in a later memo, but just to give a flavor. So use tax amounts related to highway and bridges, and then again on parks and trails, were very interesting to me in that it showed some differences in how we were applying past revenues versus department requests, and then again to the final request that came here. Just as an example, in the case of use tax for highway and bridges, we project for 2022 revenues at 3.5 million. The department's request for this budget was 2.7. The amended request was then 3.2 million. And so I guess I'm trying to get a feel and understanding of kind of how we look over time at revenues, and therefore how this works with what departments are asking for, and then what we ultimately fall on. So it was an example of, well, is this a conservative number? Is it not? I'm trying to understand how we're looking at those revenues. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we're projecting sales tax, we look at trend analysis, right? That's the first thing. What are we seeing in growth, whether it's the use tax? And certainly use tax has seen tremendous amount of growth over the last several years, and started with COVID because people couldn't get out and shop, but they did great shopping on the internet. And that we've actually kind of seen that continue. Whether it stays, I think it probably will. But it is looking at trend analysis, and then also trying to factor in what do we think the recession is going to do, and so trying to take a conservative approach. So what we start with is what do we think use tax is going to bring in as a whole. The past practice has been it's been divided into thirds. 1/3 went to capital, 1/3 general capital, 1/3 went to road and bridge, and 1/3 went to parks. In this particular year, we are recommending it's not quite a third, a third, a third. We recommended putting slightly more in road and bridge because we know that has been and was a priority of the commission to put and do more road projects.
Gotcha.
So-
But then with revenue overall, I guess my question is, again, this document is made towards the end of the year, October, whatever it is. We're now into January. We're going to pass a budget based on those numbers. Do those estimates change, or are we reliant, and do we feel confident in these proposed revenue numbers?
Revenue projections.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, so for example, to your point, the capital use tax is actually, that was one of the accounts that is at the end of 2022. The fund balance is less than we had projected would be in this budget. So there's going to have to be some adjustments made on there, not substantial, but we also want to keep a huge fund balance in any of those capital funds. So do I think that the sales tax is probably conservative and we will come in higher than what is in the budget? Yes. But don't quote me on that, even though I'm on video, because again, it just really
Yeah.
depends on, just recently I heard about a number of companies that are starting to lay off. And so, that has an impact on consumer confidence. That has an impact on, what people do with their spending,
Gotcha.
and if they have the money to spend.
Gotcha. Last one, and then I too will take the signal of my colleague over there and move along. Just a very broad reaction on some of the budgets. I'm curious why we don't put the number of FTEs and part-time employees in those budgets. Maybe for me, it helps me kind of understand kind of what particular line items affect and how many they affect. I guess this is my request for down the line as we go through this month, but it'd certainly be helpful for me to see what our FTE numbers are. And I guess the other thing that would be helpful to know within that, because sometimes you can have a number of FTEs, but sometimes there are vacancies within that. And so understanding what those numbers look like, just speaking for me, would be helpful for me to know.
And so when you say you would like to see the number of FTEs, are you wanting to see them by department, by division, by fund?
What I'd really love is by line.
By line?
Yeah.
You actually have that in your budget book.
Is it?
Back in the very back under
Is
personnel.
it back in the very back?
Because
Okay.
every position has a position number.
Okay.
And so it has the position number, the name of the individual, the title in which they have.
Got
and
it.
by what fund they're in, and if that particular fund, if they're in different departments. Now, we can do a roll-up and a composite of numbers for you.
No, that's sufficient, and after only getting into 300 pages, I
know,
haven't
it's a
quite
big
gotten to that
notebook. I
back,
know.
so.
There's a lot of data in the notebook, so.
Usually I see it with the actual line within the budget, but again, that's old habits, and now I've got to have new habits, and so that's okay. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'll give up the rest of my time.
You'll give up the rest of the other two commissioners' time?
I won't go that far. They should be able to say something.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah, I just have a couple.
Oh, please make sure your mic is on and you speak
Hit my
into it.
mic. Okay. I have such a soft voice. Just two questions. So I want to make sure I understand. The carryover right now, if I look at it, is the 113 mil. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I don't have that detail in
okay.
front of me on the carryover.
I have it. Yeah, 113, 227, 563. So,
And it's probably true if you're pulling it off that summary page in the front, and that was
Yes.
our estimate at the time. Those numbers are going to change slightly because now that we're at the year end. So, some revenues came in higher, some departments spent less money, and vice versa. So that, when I said earlier, those will be tweaked just a little. Remember that in that big number is bond proceeds and ARPA funding. So
I thought that was after ARPA was taken out.
are
Last week,
you talking about the one?
this guy.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm with you. That's not carryover. That's actually budget authorization.
Oh, okay.
The 155 million is really budget authorization, which is the operating budget plus transfers plus all our reserves. If we spent
okay.
every dollar we had in the
Okay.
bank and the
Okay.
budget, it's 155.
I'm with you. Now I'm with you. Okay. When will we have a final number for 2022?
2020, and usually it's in February, but I'm going to defer to our auditor on that, on when we actually close the books for 2022.
Yes, I think, should I come up?
Sure.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Wagner spoke about that as well with 2 months. So we're going to allow 2 months for previous purchase orders from 2022 to be paid off. At that point, we'll come back to the commission for any of those purchase orders that were authorized by the commission and reappropriate that carryover to increase the carryover, increase the expenditure authority in that year's budget. But yes, we do have, current carryover amounts at around $56 million, all funds in. But to the adopted budget will be the time where we essentially true that up and give you a balanced budget for adopted budget. So,
So when? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you say when.
well, we have to adopt the budget by the end of this month.
About, yeah, we have to, yeah, the new, and that will, when we do that, then we'll have the final numbers for 2022 by then, right?
For budgeting purposes for what we have, again, excluding those open purchase orders from 2022.
Oh, okay, you
that,
still got
you know,
purchase
we'll-
orders,
yeah.
okay. Okay, thank you. That's all I've got.
For December, so. Which I have to do modified accrual when they come back. Yeah.
Yeah, hey, thank you for all this information. My question has to do with outside agency funding. So it looks like we give about $315,000 proposals for outside agencies. Would it be possible to get every single one of these in here to give us a formal presentation? I know that Auditor Holbert has sent me some of the information, or sent me all the information that they provided, but you know, for the EDC says that they want $100,000 to do a housing study. Housing study for what? Is it just the entire county? Is it just for Excelsior Springs? What is that? So, yeah, I would just like to see, you know, how this $320,000, I mean, $7,000 for a part-time employee for Children's Mercy Hospital. I mean, their budget's a lot bigger than ours. They could easily find $7,000, and I mean, they can afford naming rights to a soccer stadium. They can find $7,000 for a part-time employee. So I just want to make sure that this $320,000 is actually a worthy investment. I mean, we have a lot of needs in this county, public safety, roads. So yeah, I would like to see how if we can get them to come in and actually give us a formal presentation so we know that we're actually spending the money wisely.
I'd be happy to arrange that for the commission at next week's meeting, if that would work. And Commissioner Whittington is correct. There are 7 agencies, outside agencies, that the county has historically given funding to. Those 7, resubmitted for 2023 funds. And it totals about $315,350 that is currently in the budget proposed. And so we can certainly invite, and just for individuals watching, that is the Northland Healthcare Area Access, Soil Conservation, the Economic Development Council, the University of Missouri Extension, which I believe under statute we're required to do, Children's Mercy, as you mentioned, Northland Neighborhood, and then Rebuilding Together Kansas City. Those are the 7 outside agencies that are in the budget for funding.
No, that was it.
Come back around, so if something occurs here, we'll certainly be able to.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson, do you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask? Well, we think it is a good idea to, on the more drill down questions, to submit those. Obviously, commissioners can ask whatever they please. I wouldn't want to inhibit any of the discussion, but that might be a way to expedite it to where you all get the information, but certainly proceed as you see fit.
So I'd like to broach the issue of law enforcement and law enforcement pay. And I've had this conversation with Dan and with a couple of the commissioners, but I didn't want to talk to too many of them, even though I wasn't in office yet, but didn't want to violate any kind of sunshine law. So I hate to throw this on everybody, but I have some concerns. And first let me back up and say, if you're not familiar with it, this is what the budget looks like printed up. It's over 500 pages. There's a lot of work that goes into this. And our county administrator, our county auditor, their staff, their team, so many people put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate this. I've been on this side of the working progress before, and I really appreciate what they've done, and they've done a fantastic job. And the real heartache that I have with this whole thing is, and not their fault, is law enforcement. And I'll tell you why. First and foremost, I ran on law enforcement. Matter of fact, every single person on the dais up here ran on law enforcement. I'd imagine if you go back for a decade or longer, I bet every single commissioner, almost every single commissioner, ran on law enforcement. And that the pro-law enforcement, pro-public safety, I should say, And there's a reason why, obviously I have a background in public safety. I was the chief of police when I retired, had 30 years in that arena. But one of the reasons why I moved to Clay County is because of the safety. And understand that public safety touches everything. It touches our home values, it touches the safety of our kids at school, it touches our small businesses, it touches our quality of life, it touches our insurance rates, it touches everything. And that's why it's so important to me. And when you look at Clay County, crime is going up everywhere. Crime is particularly high in certain areas of the county, but even higher in places outside of our county. But crooks don't know boundaries. And there's no secret that Kansas City has one of the highest, not only violent crime rates in the nation, but one of the highest property crime rates as well. I don't know if you know, the third highest rape rate in the country is in Independence, Missouri. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. When you look up the UCR numbers, the Uniform Crime Reports from the FBI, we're surrounded by a lot of crime. And these criminals don't know borders. And when you look at, if you follow any of our law enforcement in the county, whether it's our sheriff's department or some of the local law enforcement, PDs, and you follow them on any social media, and you'll see a lot of their arrests for whether carjacking, robberies, or whatever, the majority of those times, there's crooks that are coming from outside of our county coming here to do problems. And so it's because of that, I think it's really, really, really important that we have a very strong law enforcement presence. Not just law enforcement when it comes to public safety, it also includes the prosecutor's office and prosecution, that kind of thing. But starting with law enforcement, our law enforcement, our deputies in the county are the lowest paid. That's not a secret. It's the lowest paid in the region, anywhere. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's paid less than our sheriff's deputy. Starting salary for a sheriff's deputy is $19.75 an hour. With this proposed budget, the starting salary would be $21 and something cents an hour for a deputy. To put that in perspective, my kids were lifeguards at World's Finest Teenagers and made about as much as a starting deputy. My daughter is a 16-year-old. She's on the swim team at a local high school, and she's got an email from one of the local health clubs saying, hey, we'd like you to come teach swim lessons for us, $25 an hour. With sheriff's deputies and with law enforcement in general, it's tough enough trying to recruit. And there's a reason why it's tough to recruit. It's not just a matter of getting numbers. And I'm a little bit on a soapbox here, but I think it's important for people to understand this if you don't know the side of hiring for law enforcement. It's not just a number of getting people to apply. It's getting quality people to apply. And people that can actually pass. I bet most of us in this room probably couldn't pass, probably couldn't get hired at a law enforcement agency. If you're not familiar with the process, just to get hired, most of us go through, you fill out an application, maybe a resume, you might have an interview. They do all that. They sometimes have a couple interview panels you have to go through, and once you get through that, then they have to take a psychological test, a written test. It takes several hours. And then after you're done with the written psychological test, you have to actually meet and be interviewed by a police psychologist, just to see if you're psychologically stable to become a law enforcement officer. Then after that, you have a background test that's done. It's a background like none other. It's not calling references that you put down that you know are going to say good things. They want to talk to people who aren't going to say good things about you. They're going to contact your ex-spouse. They're going to contact, in my case, they contacted my mailman to find out what he knew about me. They're going to go into your finances and find out, have you ever been defaulted on any loans? Have you been late on any payments? What do your finances look like? Because that's important in law enforcement. They're going to look into your social media. And a lot of people that nowadays think that social media, you delete it, it goes away. It doesn't. Law enforcement finds it. They find everything about social media, things that you've posted in the past. And this goes on and on. And then when you're done with this 60-page background that you have to fill out, then they put you on a lie detector to see if you're telling the truth. Either a polygraph examination or a computerized voice stress simulator to see if you're telling the truth about your background. And they'll ask you all sorts of questions about everything, including sexual perversions, everything you can imagine. I was in a box for 4 hours when I went through the process as a chief. And after you do all that stuff, then to be hired, you have to know things like laws of arrest, use of force, use of deadly force, weaponless defense. Laws that most lawyers probably don't even know. Couldn't even tell you the difference between probable cause and reasonable suspicion. That an officer has to know in a split second. And then on top of those things, because risk management thought it was so dangerous and the chance of you getting shot or stabbed during your shift, we're going to issue a bulletproof vest to wear every night of your shift. And once you passed all that, and if you're up for that, and you qualify for all that, we're going to pay you $19.75 an hour. That is ridiculous. And when I was on the campaign trail, everybody who heard that said the same thing. That's ridiculous. And I know the county administrator and those involved in this budget have tried to address this, and there is an increase involved, but to me it's not high enough. The starting salary, actually, the top end salary, the very top end of our highest paid deputy, if you're a deputy sheriff for 25 years, the top end pay is less than the starting salary for many of our surrounding agencies. Let that sink in for a minute. You could be a deputy for 25 years and still not make as much as day one you would at some of the other agencies, just right around us here. And so I think there's a problem, and I've talked a little bit with the sheriff about it and with some other people about it, and I think we have to find a way to address it and not kick this can down the road anymore, because we're losing deputies. We've lost deputies, and I don't know if you guys have heard, but Liberty just had a contract negotiation where they significantly increased their pay, well above ours. And it's tough enough trying to just keep the status quo with attrition, but now with normal attrition, because you have to have people that can pass all those things that I just described. But now you have this lure of this money, and it's not all about money, but I guarantee you, if you can make $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 more a year by doing the same job as the officer that you're working right next to on a call, why wouldn't you go over to that city and work there? And some have. And so I get it's a matter of how do we pay for this, Jay? And that's an issue, but bottom line is I think we need to address the pay for our deputies. I would like to see it on the campaign trail. I was very clear about it. It's even in the paper. I would like to see a minimum of starting salary of $25 an hour for our deputies. That's $52,000 a year. $52,000 a year to go through all the things that I talked about. And you know, I've been accused of being too biased for law enforcement. I don't think I'm biased. I've walked in their shoes is what I've done, and I understand what they go through. And seeing what our deputy sheriffs have paid, we're the largest law enforcement agency. Clay County Sheriffs is the largest law enforcement agency in the county. Our sheriffs are the ones, our deputies are the ones that back up almost all the other law enforcement agencies in the county. They're on every call, side by side, just about with these other, and when they get in a pickle, these other agencies, they're going to call the sheriff's department to come help bail them out, which is great, mutual aid, that's how it works. But it's not right what we pay. It's not right, I think, for those of us who've ran on a public safety platform and those for the decades before us who ran a public safety platform to not put our money where our mouth is. If this was, I mentioned it before, if this was equal to prevailing wage, we wouldn't be able to hire our sheriff's deputies because they don't get paid enough. They don't get paid anywhere near the average. They're at the very bottom. And with this salary increase, they're still very close to the bottom, but when everybody else starts kicking in their cost of living adjustments, they're also going to be, or we will be all the way back at the bottom again. And so I'm throwing it out because I think it needs to be addressed. And I threw out a number for you, $25 an hour, which is numbers that have to be crunched on that to see what that would even look like, but just ballpark, and I'm guessing that's probably another $1 million or so to the budget, which is less than 1% of our budget. But it's the number one priority that I have, and it was a priority of most of our, or all of our commissioners have ran on public safety. And so I think, and I'm one of 7, I think we need to figure out a way to get a little further than what this budget does. And if that means, well, I've got a lot of ideas on how to do that, but I'm just going to start that discussion there and throw that out and see where everybody else lands on this and where it goes.
Commissioner Thompson, do you have any questions or comments that are related to our budget?
No, thank you. I think everybody up here is in agreement that we wholeheartedly stand with law enforcement. I know we have come leaps and bounds from even just when we three sat up here in the beginning of, 2 years ago, of making sure that we do right by our sheriff's department and our deputies, and we stand behind them and the men and women who put their lives on the line every day. I am all on board doing whatever we can to make sure they're safe and paid adequately, and this has been an ongoing discussion, and we fully support moving forward with the second phase of the pay phase here. I'm open to all options, so if there's something, you can get us something in the budget, and I'm all on board, so tell me where we go for this. So that's all I have. So you won't get any argument from me, so.
Commissioner Carpenter?
I have no additional comments at this time. Thanks.
No, I agree that with the idea that we in this county have not, at some point in our history, done right by the Sheriff's Department, and those of us that were here during some of those days understand what a tough fight it was. I would say that we've made significant progress, especially over the last 3 budget cycles, in bringing the Sheriff's Department up. It does take time to do so, and we do need to find the money. But I think it's pretty obvious that there's been a change of heart within the commission over the last 3 budget cycles, and in no small part due to our new 2 commissioners, because that is really when things turned around, when you 2 individuals joined and we started adopting a different attitude towards that particular part of our government, which is absolutely core performance of what we need to do as a commission. So I certainly want to extend my personal gratitude for the two associate commissioners who are now, I guess, more the senior associate commissioners, for the work that they have done to bring us to where we are. There's always further we can go, but certainly the work that you 2 individuals have put in has been something that we can be proud of the progress we're making. There is more work to do, and we all understand that. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I don't disagree with anything my colleagues have said, although I will say I think at some point I also talked about roads, a real park system, and I shouldn't say it that way, more of a park system than what we presently have. And since I am in the Western District and there is no unincorporated part of the county within my district, to see part of everyone's tax dollars that come in to go into that area as well and show some value for what everyone pays. But part of that, and man, I've been through budgets. I know, Mr. Presiding Commissioner, the budget that I dealt with for 8 years was 12 times what we've got here. And so what I am used to is when the department says, this is my request, you are to take that, and to take that as the request. And I would note, and just to prove to a county administrator that I actually did read this budget, just didn't get to the end. Page 249 of 412 is the budget for law enforcement, and it suggests that the department's request was $9.9 million for 2023. Your proposed budget says $10.8 million. My assumption is what was asked for, at least at the time it was asked, was provided. Now, it always depends on the date, right? And I understand we've got other communities that aren't waiting for us to pass our budget. They're doing their own thing. And we are now in a position where we have to respond to that, to either do nothing or to do something to be more equitable. And I certainly recognize that. So my hope is, as we go through this request, and I understand this request, that we also, with our law enforcement partners, there's an understanding that there is only so much money that there is available to us. And whatever we do, if we do decide to raise that amount this year, means that that's your base for next year. And we've already had the conversations, which I won't belabor, about our reserves and reserve policy. So it all must work together, and I expect that whatever we do as part of this conversation must work together. But I also want to put out there just the notion that when you ask for a budget from the various departments, what they give you should be in line with what they believe that they need. And I don't want to start a practice of getting a number only to find out during this process that the number really isn't the number, because that creates a lot of problems down the road in a lot of other departments and for all of us. So I just want to at least temper that with that particular warning.
And if I could talk a little bit about that. So you're absolutely correct. We send out budget documents to departments and office holders and ask them to submit their budget requests. And so that comes in, and that included, phase 2 of the pay plan for the sheriff's office. And I will say, when we got all the numbers, it all comes in, and then you match it with revenues, including having to use carryover, we had a gap. And so I will say that, we appreciate the sheriff's office, the road and bridge, the parks department, all our large major departments came to the table, and we said, here's our choices. If we want to take care of employees, we can't do everything that's in your operating budgets. So they all came to the table very graciously and, fine-tuned the pencil and looked at their operating budgets so that we could have the budget that we have today. And so, yes, the request that we received from the sheriff's office for the pay plan is exactly what he requested. We did fund. In fact, we funded a little bit more than what was requested because this is the second phase. I believe in his first phase, there were changes that were made to the command staff at a different level than the rank and file. And so the command staff were not necessarily in this phase 2 getting increases. Yet we know that we increased healthcare premiums to all our employees this year. So I did talk to the sheriff about adding a small 1% to those that he had not planned to be in the phase 2, so that we could at least try and make them whole when it came to increasing the cost of health care. So if it looks like it's a little bit more, that may be the reason why. Yeah.
Commissioner Lawson.
Okay, well, one thing I want to say off the front here is that I, like Jay, know what it's like. I wasn't on the police department, thank you, Jesus, but my husband was on for over 20 years. I saw him come home. He'd lost a percentage of the sight in one eye. He had a broken arm. He had all kinds of stuff. Got hit by a drunk coming out of the Kansas City Chiefs because he didn't want to go the way Jay directed him to go. So he hit him and knocked him out of the way so he could go the way he wanted to go. So he was hurt. He was shot. He was everything, And so for me, I have this soft spot for the law enforcement guys, especially those guys out on the street. They're putting their life literally on the line for us. So I want to see them get what they deserve. But I'm kind of the way he is to some degree, in that this is what was asked for and this is what we gave. So now, couple of things. I understood that we were, in this budget, we had an increase in salary to some degree, not what we'd like to see it, but to some degree for the men, or the men and women on the sheriff's department, correct?
Correct. My understanding is the current starting salary for a deputy is $41,000 or $42,000. And in the phase 2 plan that was presented, I believe the sheriff is raising that to $45,000 for all new deputies coming in. But as we know, then you have compression issues because we have men and women that have worked for us for years. And so I believe he also then factored in giving increases to those individuals to address compression issues. If you're bringing somebody new in at a certain rate, then it impacts everybody else. And so that was in, and this phase 2 pay plan, I think, is a little over $1 million increase in wages and benefits to fund the phase 2 plan.
Okay, so, and it's already planned for the following year as well?
It's in our forecast going forward.
Okay, good deal. Then this might be something I have to, the sheriff may have to answer, but is there anything in his budget that and I don't want to take away from safety or anything that's going to cause anybody harm, but is there anything in there that could be decreased or held off or anything that would allow us to maybe increase the salaries a little bit by decreasing something else here? So I don't know, is that an option that's hanging out there?
Well, I think that's a question for the sheriff.
Okay.
You know, they're the subject matter experts, always defer to departments on, you know, if there is some flexibility for them on that. So, and I think Will's here, I think Sheriff's here.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, and the other thing is, you know, you have to look at, we all, like Jay said, Jay, not my Jay, but like Jay Johnson said, we have to really look at the law enforcement. I want to see them get money. We ran on it, he and I both. That was our number one priority, was law enforcement and roads and bridges and the budget, to keep it within the fiscal responsibility that we should have for that money that the people give us. Because after all, it's not our, well, some of it's my money, but, you know, it's the constituents, and they're watching like hawks to see what we do with the money we have. I would like to see more of it go to the sheriff. I just guess I'd like him to tell me, is there something I can cut out? Is there something I can pull back to give my men more money? Men and women, excuse me, I'm not being politically correct. And then other than that, what have we got sitting around somewhere? I'm not talking about, you know, our reserves or anything, but where can we transfer money, and is it out there to be transferred? So I'd like him to answer first about what we can do within the budget, and then maybe you can say, is there anything hanging out there that we could utilize to help the guys?
By the way, as the sheriff comes forward, I do want to make sure that, I'm happy that you're responsive, but we also understand that the budget, and yours in particular, is complicated. So this is a spontaneous request for information, so your comments are welcome, and we certainly understand if you want to give supplemental information after this. I'm sure
Yeah,
that...
and I didn't mean to throw you under the bus. I just, you know, I thought maybe that you could tell us better than anybody else.
So with that, please proceed, Mr. Sheriff.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I will make this part quick because I know the County Administrator still has a lot more information to give you. To answer your question, Commissioner Lawson, we actually asked for $1.6 million over than what we're getting. And, I'm sorry, with our budget request, but we were asked to cut it by $1.6 million. So when you ask if there are any other areas to cut from, sure, I can keep trimming off of it, but what it does is it affects our operations. And to the point where, you know, tax money goes throughout the county, yeah, we are everywhere. We have 17 school resource deputies in the North Kansas City School District. We have our drug task force that operates everywhere in Clay County and adopts every fentanyl case, not only in Clay County, but in adjacent counties as well. So we're going beyond, and it's not that we're trying to spend money elsewhere. Our community is affected just the same, and sometimes if not more, because the dealers are operating outside of our county where they feel safe. So we have to adopt those cases too. So can we keep trimming? Absolutely, we can keep trimming, but it's going to affect our operations. And when crime rates are going up, how are we going to continue to back the agencies up? The other law enforcement agencies, the mutual aid, I mean, we're stretching ourselves thin. And one example that I would like to give to you is the Kansas City Police Department. They're almost 500 positions down. Let that sink in, 500 positions down. 125,000 people, just over 100,000 people live in 90 square miles of Kansas City within Clay County. When they can't respond to their calls for service, who responds to their calls for service? When we respond and we can't respond to the unincorporated area, who responds to our unincorporated area? Liberty, Excelsior Springs, Smithville, Kearney. When they have calls for service and they're blacked out, who responds to those jurisdictions? It's a cascading effect, right? And I would like to say that we're the only ones who have the problem, but unfortunately, it's law enforcement across the country. So to answer your question, we actually asked for more. We were asked to bring it down by 1.6 million. We were able to get it to about 1.35. Don't quote me on those numbers. I'm trying to get as close as possible. But we did everything that we could, working with the budget team. And I do have more information, but I will step aside and I'll wait for elected official comments.
I was going to say, yeah, and any information certainly that you would like to impart to us, perhaps the most efficient way would be to submit it to the chief budget officer, and then she will make sure that we all get that additional information that we might find helpful in processing the budget.
Yeah, I mean, and so in my experience for the last 3 budget cycles, we always ask for everything that we need, knowing that we're going to be cutting back because the county only has so much money. And the way I look at county functions is everyone who's sitting behind me who has a role in county, we're all one team. And I understand that, yes, our deputies are sorely underpaid, $14,000 underpaid, all right, compared to our neighboring law enforcement agencies. And to Commissioner Johnson's point, our top-out pay for a deputy is still lower than starting salaries in some agencies in the KC metro area. Our deputies take note of that. And yes, we have deputies leaving, experienced deputies leaving for a $30,000 increase in salary. Now, they're going to work for it, where they go, but it's still they're leaving us. And that's tenured experience leaving us. We can hire more people, but you're going to get a brand new person who takes years to train to get up to that point. So.
The other thing is you sent a really great piece of information to Scott, and he shared that with me. Were we to be able to do, it was, let me say, I don't know if everybody got a copy of that or not, but it was showing, explain how that exactly was. Do you remember? I think.
Oh, I remember everything. No, why don't I phrase it, so background, we were aware of this request. I've reached out to the sheriff to ask him, is this really your request? And I've shared this conversations with some, but not all. So I apologize for those who this will be new information to. But I guess let's just kind of pare it down to the essential, which is talk about the request that the commissioner has thrown out there with respect to, because I like understanding what I'm buying, right? So if you were to take that request and divide it out as far as what does that mean for salary, and you look at the increments of that salary to move it. I don't know if it's 52 that you get to with it, but could you maybe just talk about how do you break down those dollars and how do you escalate through a salary range based on availability of funds? Maybe I'll say it that way if that's.
Yeah, I just thought that it was a lesser amount than $1 million, and so I wondered if, it was lesser amount than $1 million, so I wondered if that was something that was more doable than, what we'd really like to see them get. But how do you feel about, I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm up here as long as you would like me to be up here. And since these questions are going to this extent, what I would like to do is kind of back up a little bit. And it would be very remiss of me if I didn't publicly thank the county administrator and the budget team for everything that they have done. And one step beyond that, to let you know that our county administrator, Diana, was instrumental in helping us throughout the budget process and everything else that we were doing as far as the Law Enforcement Resource Center and the improvements for the detention center, and the list goes on. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The information that I provided to the commissioners the other day was just information highlighting the disparity between the Clay County Sheriff's Office salary structure and pretty much the major law enforcement agencies that we would be compared to, where we're actually losing people to. Now, that's important because if we start talking about the middle of Missouri, the middle of Kansas, apples and oranges, because that is not our market. Our market is the Kansas City area. So I sent all that information out. Yes, going back to the budget request of, I think it was $1.18 million for the salary, the second phase salary restructure. But that salary structure was a product of 3 years ago. It already became obsolete a year and a half ago, but we were following through with the request since the commission couldn't give the second phase in 2022. So they were able to provide a proposed budget of the restructure, so second phase. But to Commissioner Johnson's point, right now we're $14,000 behind, but even at a starting salary of $45,000, we're still $10,000 behind. We are the lowest paid law enforcement agency. The information that I gave Commissioner Wagner is an increment kind of per $1,000 over 45, so 46,000, 47,000, 48,000, and I'm going to try to recall this by memory. It's roughly $180,000 per $1,000 over. And so that was just a rough estimate. And that includes what I could kind of figure in for benefits as well, to include surf and loggers, the 4% and the 19.8%. So that was just a breakdown. What I would love to see $1 million additional applied to the salary structure of the sheriff's office employees, absolutely, absolutely, hands down. But when I go back and I say this, that we're one team, I also understand that trying to find another $1 million when I've got partners in the room who are probably asking for the same, I'm not going to stand up here and say it's only for the sheriff's office. However, I am the elected official, and I'm going to advocate for my office. Now, if the commission is able to come up with some guidance for the budget team, that would be amazing, and I would be absolutely accessible to kind of work through that. But I think more than just giving, I love Commissioner Johnson's idea of giving another $1 million, which roughly that's going to bring us up to $52,000 starting, and adjust to the right for everyone else, not just the starting salary, okay? Because if we don't do that, we're going to end up with wage compression again. And the wage compression that we just unscrewed was about 27 years worth of wage compression. So now we're kind of at a baseline again. So anything on top of what I requested is just going to get us closer and closer to being more competitive in our market. The way we're doing it, though, we're falling farther and farther behind. If we don't take a bigger leap and try to get us to where we're competitive now, or in a year from now, we're just going to continue to fall further and further behind. Now, I'm 20 years ago, when I went to law enforcement, there were 600 applicants for 80 positions. We're lucky if we get 10 applications for 13, 14 vacancies, and they have to pass everything. When we start talking about sexual perversions, like, I'll spare you, okay? But when you can't pass that part, we have a problem in society. We check MySpace. Just to give you an example of how deep we go into social media, did you even know MySpace was still around? We do. So if we're not spending more time in trying to put forth the effort to get us to where we need to be at, we're going to continue losing employees. We do have people who want to work for the sheriff's office because of the culture that we created, not only in the sheriff's office, but the culture that you have all created, as well as many members in this audience, the reputation of Clay County now. When I go to different parts of the state, when I go to Jeff City, no longer am I asked, what's Clay County politics like? It's, wow, you guys are really killing it over there. You guys are doing such a good job. Far cry from what it used to be. That's what pleases me. So we have built a tremendous culture here in Clay County over the last 2 years. The problem is, culture can only go so far. If we don't start paying our employees an appropriate wage for the work that they do, they're just going to say, man, I really wish I could work for you. And quite frankly, I get those messages, whether on direct messages from social media, emails, phone calls. I wish I could come work for you. You just can't afford me. And they're only making $5,000 more a year. But when you put it in perspective, we have employees who can't even pay their utilities. We have employees that work for the Clay County Sheriff's Office that can't even live in the county they serve because it's too expensive to live here. So if we don't make it worth for them to work, for them to want to work for the Clay County Sheriff's Office, all the problems that we're experiencing that we're able to cover right now, I'm going to have to take drastic measures like many other large metropolitan agencies across the country and start reducing the calls for service that we respond to, the types. I don't want to do that because we still have a duty to respond and be there for the people of Clay County. And if I can't respond because I don't have the personnel, then we're all going to suffer. So that's the information that I wanted to.
Might I suggest, just on the exchange that we just had, the information that you imparted to Commissioner Wagner, which I was able to, which he shared with me, can we make a habit of having that go through so all commissioners are informed? If you're going to talk to each individual commissioner and we are trying to share information, you need to communicate to us in a more broad manner. Otherwise, we're all getting different information. So we really need you to be able to provide the information to all commissioners so that we all have the same information and we're all proceeding from the same baseline of information. That's going to make our discussions and our decision-making much more informed.
And I have done that. The information that I gave to Commissioner Wagner, Commissioner Johnson, and Commissioner Withington, it was based off of a conversation that we were already having. And so to put some numbers really quickly together, it was just, gosh, let me run through this real quick and I'll send it to you. If that was something that I felt that was important for all the commissioners to get, I would have emailed all of you, just like I did the other night.
Okay.
So
Well,
that
certainly
is a practice of mine.
certainly when you feel that there is information that we need to know as a commission, we would certainly like to hear it. What Commissioner Wagner had struck me as instructive and helps me in my decision-making process. Please err on the side of more information for us than less. You can't cut out part of the commission and not inform them on information. So please try to be more broad in your dissemination of information.
Okay, and I would also ask the commission that if you feel that it's important for the rest of your cohorts to have that information, let me know. I have 1,000 things going on in my head, and my intent is not to keep information from any of you. It's just when you ask me a question, I'm going to answer. If you feel like that information is important for the rest of the group, because I don't know the conversations you're having, let me know. I'd be happy to share it.
And Commissioner Nolte, as the mea culpa in this, I will send an email after we are done here today with the information that the sheriff supplied to me, which I was impressed how well he could do it on the fly at 8:30 in the evening as I'm trying to understand what is going on here. So
Go ahead and send that to the administrator.
And I will to the administrator
That way
and the
we can
county
make sure all,
counselor
that
as
not
well.
only ourselves, but budget
Yes.
team is available to all information available so that we can make our decision based on that.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Lawson, did you have anything else?
Oh, no, I'm done.
Okay, great.
Thank you
Thank you,
very much
Mr.
for your
Sheriff.
time.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Commissioner Withington.
Yeah, no, I agree with Jay. I think we need to do something to help get these sheriff deputies more pay. I did a police ride-along over the summer, and the deputy I rode with, he has to work off-duty shifts every time he's off just to pay his bills. So we need to do something. And as a Kansas City resident, we answered 2 or 3 calls that day in Kansas City because Kansas City police were unavailable. So as a Kansas City resident, we rely a lot on the Clay County Sheriff's Department for service. So also, I agree with Commissioner Wagner. I would like to see more investment in our parks. Talking to people at Smithville Lake, there's a lot of maintenance and everything that they would like to see done and a lot of improvements. They've been emailing me a list of everything, and when I get it, I'll share that list with the commission and you. But also, I want to, not this year, but eventually I would like to see the western side of the county, which I represent. Well, I represent the whole county, but I'm from the western district. We don't see a lot of investment from the county, but we have a lot of green space. And we're also probably one of the least walkable areas in the entire metropolitan area. We were some of the first annexed into Kansas City neighborhoods south of Vivian Road, and there's no curbs, no sidewalks. Some neighborhoods have ditches still. Kids cannot walk to school. They're bused as close as 1 mile, as close as 1 block to school. So I would like to see the county start working with these municipalities on building out trails in these green spaces. One example is Maplewood Elementary. Searcy Creek Greenway runs right through it, There is no north-south connection through the entire neighborhood, so I would like to see the county, Kansas City's working on putting in a trail there, Westminder, but I would like to see the county start looking at how we can partner with municipalities to address some of these infrastructure needs, so. But yeah, I would like to hear Jay's, Commissioner Johnson's plan on paying the deputies because, yeah, I think it's something we really need to do. I know we've lost some to Kearney in the last few months. When Liberty's put out their social media posts about their pay, my social media inbox was filling up from deputies saying, boy, it sure would be nice to get this kind of salary. So we need to do something. We can't kick the can down the road any longer. We need to do something ASAP, so.
I'm going to just go around once more, make sure, and then we'll close it out with any closing remarks from the administrators. Anyone else who has a comment that they would like to add before? Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, a couple of follow-ups here. Just first responding to some things that have been said. One was that significant progress has been made with the Sheriff's Department over the years. Progress has been made, but that progress has kept them at the very bottom. So whether that's significant or not, it has kept them at the very bottom of the pay scale, not just the county, but the region. In addition to that, this proposed budget, a yes vote on this secures their spot at the very bottom. Just so you realize that. We all ran on public safety, and we're going to secure their spot at the very, if not the very bottom, but very close to the bottom. And asking to pay our sheriff's deputy a starting salary of $52,000 does not put them at the top. It doesn't even put them at the halfway mark, to tell you the truth. It just gets them in the ballgame. And by the way, we're talking about sworn deputies. I also think that the non-sworn, there needs to be a salary study done for them as well to see. And I think there needs to be a salary study done for just about everybody in the county. And Diane and I have talked about that. But I think that's important just so we can see where everybody's at and where they should be, what's fair. The sheriff has addressed a couple things, but one, it was mentioned that, you know, this is a phased approach that he has. That's outdated. It started a couple years ago, and it's outdated based on a lot of number of things, but he's already talked about that. And also has been talked about, hey, this is what he put in for the budget. And if you don't know how a budget process works, and I've been on the department head side of the budget process where I've gone to the city manager, which is like the county administrator, and hey, this is what I want. It's more of a negotiation that takes place. It's like, yeah, that's great, that's what you want, that's not what you're getting. Let's negotiate something a little bit more reasonable. And that's what happens. And so what was presented by the sheriff and by any department head is going to be, hey, this is what's reasonable, this is what we think we can reasonably get out of the budget this year, not what I want. And as he said, there's a lot more that he wants. And part of the problem that we have with our budget, I think, is that we have a line item budget that we use. And when you use a line item budget, you do exactly what I just described. Every year we go back and say, you know what, Sheriff, you had this much this year or last year. How much do we need to tweak this? Keep it in reasonable. We're going to tweak this next year. You know, let's go back to IT. Let's go back to parks. Let's go back to all these different departments and say, you know what, this is what you had last year. Let's tweak a little bit. And when you keep going down that road, you get in the position that we're in now, where the sheriffs are the least paid in the county. They're the biggest agency. And everybody here runs on public safety. And everybody before us ran on public safety. And yet we're going to keep them down at the bottom. It doesn't make sense. And this isn't for me. This is for the people who elected me, who said, hey, I'm all for public safety. I think it's disgusting that our sheriff started at $19.75 an hour. That was told to me on multiple occasions. And when I threw out the number, hey, would $25 an hour minimum be something? He says, minimum. That's what I hear from so many people. And so because we use this line item budget, we're kind of stuck in this groove. And so what might have to happen, and so here's my proposal. Here's what I think should happen. And if you guys are on the same page, great. But first of all, I do want to mention that Clay County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state, which means our sheriff's department should also be one of the fastest growing sheriff's departments in the state to keep up with that growth. Something to keep in mind. That's going to cost money. But here's what I think should happen with the sheriff's department. This is my proposal. The process I think should happen. First, I think it should go back to the county administrator and the the auditor to take a look at, first of all, what exactly are those numbers? If we want to get these to, I threw out $1 million, I could be off on that, could be 800, it could be 1.2, I don't know. What exactly is the numbers we're looking at? If we want to give them, get them up to $25 starting salary. And deal with compaction issues. And compaction issues can be dealt with a couple of ways. One, this budget kind of deals with compaction issues already. You call it compaction or compression? Compression. Compression issues is dealt with somewhat, the sheriff has in this county. So it doesn't necessarily mean that whatever percentage it takes them from 1975 to, or actually, this budget has it at 20-something an hour, from 20-something to $25 an hour. That doesn't mean that everybody has to climb that same percentage. It could be that exact amount. In other words, if it's a $5 increase for our deputies' starting salary, then it's everybody up the chain gets $5. It's not percentage. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's one suggestion. But we send this back to the experts and say, hey, we'd like to see what it would look like. Where could, number one, what would this cost, first of all, to get to this point? And what do you suggest, how do you suggest we get there? First, let's look at the revenue sides. Is the revenue projections, are they the same now? I think we talked about a little bit. Are they the same now when those projections were made a couple months ago? Do we still think those are the same? Are they going to be better? They're going to be worse? I'm looking over at Mr. Hobart there. Could there be an adjustment there? Then we look at our expenditures. And hey, is there anything that we can cut that we can make up for this? Another option is, we put this first phase into effect of the budget now, and then part of this is January or July 1st of this year. We kick in the second half for the deputies, which means you only pay for half the year. And whether you want to find a one-time funding source for that for this year, fine, but that gives us a whole year to figure out how do we pay for this. And one of the things that we need to do, I think eventually, I talked about this line item budget, is we need to go back to zero-based budgeting for at least a year. If we can't figure this out, then you go back to zero-based budgeting. And what zero-based budgeting is that gets our priorities aligned. We clear the books. We say, what's our number one priority? And I think for most of us, public safety is going to be the number one priority. So we fund public safety properly, the way they should be funded, at the amount that we think they should be funded. Now, I'm not talking root beer coming out of the drinking fountains at the sheriff's department. I'm just talking about, hey, what's a prevailing wage? What's a good salary, an average salary? Not top of that, although I'm fine with them being at the top. There's no reason they shouldn't be, but what about just average pay? And if that's $25 an hour, well, then, okay, so when we now fund the sheriff's department, they're funded. Okay, what's our next in line of priorities? Roads and bridges. Okay, roads and bridges. Let's fully fund roads and bridges how we think they should be funded. And we just go down our list of priorities. And when I say our priorities, it should be the citizens, the voters' priorities. And once we get down, and there's certain things that we have to pay for, whether we want to or not, and there's a lot of things there that we don't have a choice. But once you go down with zero-based budget, you get to the point where you find out how important these other things really are. And either you don't get to fund some things, or they get cut significantly. But that's how you get your budget back in line with your priorities and the community's priorities. Because right now, if the priority for us and the priority for the community is public safety, our budget and what we pay our deputies doesn't show that. Don't even get me started on the prosecutor's office, because I think there's other issues there as well. But we start with, and this is just starting with our sworn, there's our non-sworn we've got to deal with. That's another issue as well, but this is my first day, so we'll just start with this. But my suggestion would be, hey, let's put it back to the administrator and the auditor and the folks that are the experts and see, hey, what are the numbers and what would it look like if you were to come up with a plan to make this happen, whether it's right away or halfway through the year. And then if they don't come back with a plan we like, then we decide, hey, do we want to do something different? Do we have a plan, or we just go with the existing budget, which the existing budget to me is not sufficient for law enforcement, and it keeps them at the bottom, which isn't public safety as a priority in my book. But there's a lot of options out there. They just have to be looked at. It's 500 pages to look at, exactly. Okay.
Thank you, I should say Chief Budget Officer in this particular function. I do have one or two last questions, and then I'll let you go ahead and do your round off of it. Do we have Phase 3 for the sheriff's pay plan?
I'm sorry, what?
Do we have a Phase 3 for the sheriff's pay plan?
I don't have a Phase 3.
Okay,
I'm
so-
sure he does, but I haven't seen it.
Here's where I'm going with that is, should we do our best to fund more for the sheriff's deputies? Yes, we should. Without a map, without a goal saying, here's where we need to be, I don't know where we go, because the thing is, we depend upon the sheriff's expertise to tell us what it is he needs to have. If we don't have Phase 3, then we have no idea where we're going. The thing is, we should have Phase 3 as a goal, if we can agree upon that. We should be looking at Phase 3, and it's not, you can't just simply say more money. There has to be a plan put before this commission if we are going to responsibly budget. And that brings me to the second thing that occurs to me, and that is my understanding, and I haven't heard any contradictions to it, is that we have fully funded Phase 2, which is great news. Now we need to have Phase 3. But the thing is, the sheriff's request was fulfilled and perhaps a little over. If we don't have people, when we are funding these things, if the departments are not giving us numbers that we can depend on, we really don't have a budget anymore. I don't recall any of the other departments coming forward and making these kinds of requests, not to say that it's out of line or that it shouldn't be done, but if everybody comes up and says, I need more for my area, roads and bridges are an area that we need to be looking at, and we need to be considering our resources there. But if everybody comes forward and says, yes, I know I asked for this much, but I need this much more, I don't see how you budget on that kind of a moving target. It becomes an impossible task. So my thought is I would like to see a Phase 3 so that we can understand where it is we're going, and so we understand how we get there. Then we can start working through that. Seems to me to be the logical way, and I think we're all going to be very enthused to look at Phase 3 and start working on ways that we can do that. But without a plan, without any background, it becomes difficult to say where we're going. And one of the things that we're going to be doing going forward is not just planning for the next year, but we're going to be planning for the next 5 years. That being the case, which I think is a positive thing, we need to understand where we're going a lot more than we have in the past. So we're going to need to know what the goals are for 23, for 24, for 25, for 26. We're going to need to be analyzing those goals and coming up with a consensus decision as to whether or not that's where we need to go. We need to work in close consultation with the sheriff, and in the other areas of the budget, we need to work in close consultation with them, which everything I see tells me that the Chief Budget Officer has in fact been working in that vein. So with that, I'll let you go ahead and just give us a kind of a wrap-up on the discussion, any items that you want to address that you might think have not been addressed.
Jerry, can I respond to that real quick?
No.
Two comments?
Well, the thing is, yes, go ahead, but we've got to, at some point, and to tell you the truth, as presiding, I do kind of get to do that last-minute submission, so I'll give you one more thing, but you've had you've had certainly a sufficient amount of time to work through this, but go ahead and give us another comment.
I don't have time limits, do I?
It's more the idea that we're trying to round off the discussion at some point. So go ahead and do this, because I realize I want to give some latitude, and it's an important issue, so yeah, we have to end the discussion at some point.
Well, what your summation just did is took all the talking points that I had and summarized them with, hey, we're going to kick this down the road. We're going to kick this can down the road, and we'll talk about it next budget cycle. Is that what you're talking about with this Phase 3?
I'm saying we need a plan. We had a plan for Phase 2, and that was a positive plan, and I'm glad we had Phase 2. That told us where we needed to go.
Well, what plan was in place that kept him at the very bottom of the salary pay
The one submitted
for the last decade?
The one submitted to us in our budget process.
Well, the sheriff just got done telling you that he wanted $6 million more than he got.
That wasn't in personnel, that was in his operation costs.
Different category.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, when we got everything in place, including personnel requests, we knew we had a gap in budget. So we went back, and so he did cut $1 million out of his operating budget to free up funds, along with roads, highway, parks, everybody else cut out of their operating. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I think we're trying to give the impression that the sheriff's deputies are paid what the sheriffs want them to be paid right now. That's
Well,
not
that-
true.
I'm sorry, the budget request was submitted by the sheriff for the budget. I'm trying to work out how that was not his request.
Well, like I just mentioned, when it comes to budget requests, there's a negotiation that goes involved. He doesn't just say, I want this, and gets it.
Actually, in this case, he kind of did, in the personnel.
He just told you it's outdated. He just told you that request is outdated. He just,
When-
Jerry, Commissioner, here's the bottom line. This budget keeps him at the bottom. Is that what we want to do? We want to keep our sheriff's deputy at the very bottom in pay? When they're the largest agency in the county, they're responsible for our public safety. And we ran on that. You ran on that. I ran on that. The county, the voters want public safety as a priority. And we're saying, hey, the answer to that is we're going to keep them down at the very bottom.
At some point, when we produce a budget, we have to have a number. We took the number that was presented to us. Perhaps if the sheriff would have updated that, we could have done that, but for whatever reason, it was not updated.
So that's the reason we're giving, the sheriff just gave the wrong number? It's not,
No.
I'm giving you a number now. What's
Wait
wrong
a
with my
minute.
number?
Yeah, but you're not the sheriff.
Right.
No,
I'm the commissioner.
the thing is, a lot of people in this budget requested funding, and they did not necessarily get what they requested. They got less.
Right.
In this particular instance, the sheriff requested money for his pay plan, and we said, okay, here's the money for your pay plan. Now, I am perfectly happy to talk about if we can find extra money to do that. $1 million is not going to be coming up by looking through the cushions in the couch in the back room here.
$1 million is less than 1% of this budget. I guarantee we can find $1 million between revenue and expenses in this budget. But bottom line is, we have to learn to readjust. I don't care what the sheriff gave us. The sheriff will tell you right now, this is outdated. and won't-
I
won't
do care.
work.
I do care what the sheriff gives us. I do care the information that the sheriff gives us.
Okay.
You
So
might
if he
not
te-
care what the sheriff gives us. I care what the sheriff gave
So if
us.
he tells you right now, like he did, that the sheriffs need a raise, do you care about that?
Can I have some documentation on that? Can I have a plan? Can I see where the money is going?
Salaries.
Well, that's
It's just- we're just
that's a
talking-
bit broad. I mean, when the sheriff presented Phase 2, and I appreciate that, he gave us specific information about what he wanted, where that funding was going, and the sheriff has given us a stellar example of how a responsible elected official makes a request for funding, and I applaud him for that. I think that he should continue that process. When the sheriff has a plan that he wants to put forth that has some more detail than what you're outlining, then I think we should seriously consider it and see if we can fund it. But we need to know what that number is, and the thing is, the number is going to have to at some point be the number. When we vote on it, it is going to be the number, and it applies to all the other departments. So, unless you've got, I mean, the thing is, I don't want to get argumentative about it, but we have to have a number. We have to say, what is the sheriff's request?
Yeah. Well, and I don't mean to sound argumentative, and I know I often sound like that when I'm really not. But I'm passionate about it, and I understand the importance of public safety. I think more than a lot of people know. I understand when we kick this can down the road for another budget year, a lot can happen when it comes to public safety. Playing catch up to hire more deputies is not easy. We're already down about a dozen positions already and can't fill those positions. And now with what's happening with the salaries in the area, no one's going to, I personally have family members who don't come here strictly because of the salary. I went to an agency close by.
Well, two things. First off, I look forward to you identifying those revenue sources. Secondarily, it's
Wait,
the
do you want me to
sheriff's-
identify the revenue sources?
Secondarily, I look forward to hearing them as you face out. Secondarily, I want to hear what the sheriff says he needs. We could talk among ourselves what we think the sheriff needs. Perhaps we should ask the sheriff what he needs in a specific way. Phase 3 is that specific.
So if he can get us those numbers by our next meeting, will that suffice?
we will at least be able to have a discussion on what is in before us. Right now, we don't have anything before us. Right now, it's just, you want to give them more money. I don't know if the sheriff endorses your plan or not. I have no idea.
Okay, so you just want something that comes from the sheriff?
Well, yeah. He's
Okay.
the expert, isn't he? I mean,
That's fine. But we're the ones that vote on the budget.
I'm
We're
sorry?
the ones that decide the budget.
Well, what I want is not really in the cards because budget is statutorily required to be passed by the end of this month, by the 30th.
We can make it happen. What I'm saying is, the way you summarized this discussion is, okay, we'll deal with it down the road, phase 3, maybe next. I'm fine with, okay, let's hear from the sheriff, but let's give the sheriff until next week to put forth a plan of what he thinks the salary should be, an updated salary schedule, shall we say, because this one's outdated, like he said. Let's give him an opportunity to do that so we can include it in this budget, figure out a way in this budget to make it happen. That's the priority. If public safety is a priority.
Actually, that's what I just said is if the sheriff feels comfortable producing a plan that quickly, then we should consider it. But what you're saying is we shouldn't have a plan, and I believe we should. With that, I mean.
You mean a plan or a number?
Both. I mean,
Okay.
a plan has to include a number. In other words, when the sheriff makes a request, for instance, the Phase 2 request, he had a number and he had a plan, and that's exactly what the sheriff performed in an absolutely professional manner in that. I'm saying we should encourage the sheriff to continue on the professional path that he has been upon. So that's it. I mean, you know, if the sheriff is able to put that together, we should absolutely seriously consider it. But we can't sign off on something with, that is open-ended. But this is the sheriff's budget, not, well, I mean, it's our budget in general.
No, it's ours.
But the sheriff's request belongs to the sheriff,
Right.
not us.
No, that's great.
We shouldn't be dictating to the sheriff what his budget should be.
If you're open to, hey, if he can bring something back to us before, for this budget cycle,
Of course I am.
I'm happy with that.
I'm
yeah.
just saying we need information.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that that's an unreasonable request on my part.
Okay, just so that we're clear, we're gonna ask the sheriff if he can bring something back.
No,
But-
no, I said that if the sheriff comes forward to, I'm not gonna put a request on the sheriff. If the sheriff seems able to do that, the sheriff is not my employee. The sheriff is an independently elected person. The sheriff seems like he is open to do that, so I'm looking forward to hearing from the sheriff. I don't direct the sheriff.
Okay, I
The
think
sheriff
we know-
seemed like, I mean, I'm not sure what we're discussing here. The sheriff said he is good with putting that together. Great, we are always happy to hear from the sheriff. So I'm not sure what your concern is here.
My concern is that we don't kick this down the road. Our sheriffs we pass this budget as
Is next week not good enough for you?
What's that?
Is next week not good enough?
That's good. Yeah, I'd
Well,
appreciate that.
then, if the sheriff is going to do that, then the sheriff can do that.
Okay.
That's not kicking it down the road by saying, well, let's talk about it next week when we have information.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jerry, if I offended you. The way you summarized our conversation was, we need a plan, phase 3, and it made it sound to me like this was something you wanted down the road, and it wasn't something that can be part of this budget. I think it's important to be part of this budget.
I am unwilling to give the sheriff a deadline that is not necessary to give him. When the sheriff has his information together and he wishes to present it, he will find, I think, open ears here. So that's kind of where we're at. With that, I'm sorry we got kind of off track. Chief Budget Officer, please summarize and get us home.
I'll be happy to do that. So, again, my takeaway is some of you have what I would consider more detailed questions that you would like answered. Scott, you mentioned a few, and I think others do. So please email those to me. We will put together a Q&A sheet, and we will email all that information out to all of you. I heard that you would like for us to invite the outside agencies in. We'll try and have them here next week. That they would do a public presentation on their requests. The meeting next week is at 6 o'clock. It's also only got 2 items on it, so it would be a great night to have those individuals come in and do their presentations to you. And certainly we are available, the budget team and I are available to work with the sheriff, because as he said, when he was looking, putting the actual costs together on salary adjustments really does involve a lot more when you're talking about fringe benefits. And so we're happy to work to figure out what that is. But I would caveat that with saying there is no extra money laying around. And so if we make adjustments, and I'm not saying we don't, then we will have to make some choices of moving money in this budget because we just don't have the reserves to come up with it. And I cannot in clear conscience stand up here and tell you to use one-time money for personnel costs. So unless there's something else I missed that you would like for us to put together for you before next week, we will be discussing budget for the rest of the month.
And I'm assuming that if commission members come up with any additional questions, they can certainly reach out to you.
Absolutely. Well, again, I encourage you to send me your questions, and then we will, again, compile those questions, compile the answers, and send them out to all of you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That concludes our discussion item. And actually, Administrator, you take off your Chief Budget Officer hat and put on your County Administrator hat, because this is the time for County Administrator comments, so please proceed.
Yes, just a couple items briefly, and I mentioned it, but the next meeting of the commission is next Wednesday at 6 o'clock here in the chambers. And also want to remind all of you and to invite the public to attend the bicentennial closing celebration that is occurring Thursday evening, tomorrow night, from 5:30 to 7 o'clock. I believe presentation and comments are at 6 o'clock, and it's being held at the Woodneath Library. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to Commissioner comments. I'll start with Commissioner Withington and work our way down.
So I really don't have anything, but I do want to say congratulations to Dan Lanning. He's the head coach for the Oregon Ducks. He played college football less than a mile from here at William Jewell College. Also, want to say congratulations to Greg Jones, who is also a coach for the Oregon Ducks. He was the head football coach for many years at Kearney and Liberty North. And then I want to say congratulations to Robbie Disher. Now, this one might be a little sensitive to our USC alum, but Tulane, he played college ball also at William Jewell, and he is the special teams coordinator for Tulane University, and they just beat the USC Trojans in the Cotton Bowl. So congratulations to those guys.
Commissioner Lawson.
I just want to say that I'm really looking forward to this year. This has been an interesting first meeting, and I'm looking forward to many more, and for us working together, accomplishing some great things. Thank you.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I echo my colleague's sentiment that this was a very interesting meeting, and I know will continue to be interesting as we move forward. I do feel a little bit, I feel it necessary, if hopefully I'm not going too far back, but the last budget that I was responsible for was $1.7 billion, had 20 different departments in it, included airports, utilities, and a whole number of things, and no one ever got exactly what they wanted, and everyone had to negotiate what they could get. But what I am most concerned about is whatever we decide to do as a body must be sustainable. It cannot just be, we're going to fix a problem only to create another problem that has to be fixed. And I just want, as we have these discussions, whether it's about a budget or anything, that we just remember that people not only wanted roads and public safety and any number of things, but they wanted a government that worked. And to me, part of what that means is you've got to have a government that doesn't create new problems for itself to solve. Because that could just mean you have endless problems. So that's the spirit I come in here with, and I look forward to working with this group to accomplish that, and I believe we can accomplish that. And I look forward to proving that over the next month. Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter.
No additional comments. Commissioner Withington mentioned Robbie Disher. I'll just say, went to high school with Robbie, so he's a good Northtown grad too, so we love Robbie, even though he beat us in the big game. So I will, I guess, just echo Commissioner Wagner's comments too, which is retain some hopefulness about this body's ability to move the county into the future and do good things and serve the people and solve problems, and look forward to doing that with y'all.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I would like to start with just welcoming all of our new commissioners. This is our first meeting as a full body, and this is a big day here for Clay County. And I will say I'm glad that we no longer have empty seats for my purse to sit on, which I will say, so if we ever get hangry during the meetings, I do keep snacks in my purse. Just saying, gentlemen, if anyone gets a little hungry, just let me know. I can help you out with that. But I know that, in all seriousness, You know, we're going to work together, and we're bringing a new light here to Clay County. And that means the issues we're dealing with today, we're going to resolve them. It's all going to be all right. And that involves even issues that we as a body have went and discussed and voted on in the past 2 weeks, or even in the past 2 years. Anything and everything is on the table. We're all going to work together. Like I said, there's snacks. We're going to have coffee. Jimmy had mentioned beer the other day. So I think we're all going to work together, and it's going to be great. So thank you all for just being here.
Commissioner Johnson.
I think it's been a fun first meeting. I'm glad to be here. And actually, I just want to thank everybody who had a hand in on the budget and the preparation. It's a lot of work, I get it. And so I just want to say thank you. I think you guys have done a good job. So I appreciate all the work that all the staff has put into this. But no, I'm passionate. I'm not argumentative. I come across argumentative. I'm not. I'm passionate. I love you guys.
I want to echo Commissioner Johnson's remarks. I had neglected to say thank you to the administrator, or I should say Chief Budget Officer, staff, and everyone else who has had a part in constructing this budget. Anyone who's been involved in that sort of a process understands that it is difficult, it is complicated, and it can take a little bit of negotiating to get through the other side of it. So certainly I want to say that. I want to welcome the new commissioners to the commission, because now I think we find ourselves in a much better position as a county, and we have our way forward, I think, is pretty clear, and we've got the ability to really shine. Last thing that I want to mention is I want to say thank you to Commissioner Carpenter. He has been our pro tem for the past year, which I appreciate. It is important to have someone in that position who is able to pick up the load and to do a lot of the work that needs to be done. With that, in the new year, we're going to be naming a new pro tem, and that would be Scott Wagner, our Western Commissioner, Seat 2. I'm very happy to be able to have someone who has the knowledge base and the ability to analyze what is going on in government. I think it's going to be a very productive time, so I will be appointing, and I am appointing Scott Wagner as our pro tem for this commission, and I'm looking forward to his service, looking forward to working with him as well as the rest of this commission. So with that, I have my little document here. I will give a signed copy to the Commissioner Pro Tem, and that concludes my remarks. That brings us to recess and adjournment. We are adjourned.